Hello everybody, my name is Zeke. Welcome to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to be talking about the 5-ish books that I read this month. It was kind of a strange mix. This was a very unplanned month. I usually end up reading, I would say majority or at least half from just random stuff I get from the library, but this month, for whatever reason, I just had some physical books that I wanted to get through, plus a reread, which I never do, and also I just think the mix of books is very kind of random, and I covered a lot of different genres. I have a play in here, so it's just kind of a random month, but it was definitely an interesting month. I wouldn't say I read a ton of stuff that I absolutely loved, but there were certainly a lot of things that I got to that I really wanted to get to. So it was overall a successful month. I didn't read maybe as much as I expected to or wanted to, but that's okay, and I still was able to read a decent amount, and that is all that matters in the end. I'm gonna start with the first book I read this month, which is Endymion by Dan Simmons. This is technically the third book in a series, but it's kind of the second part of that series. So it's a 4-book series called the Hyperion Cantos, and this second half is very different from the first half, but also it's still very much related, so I don't want to go into too much plot spoilers, because obviously a lot happens in those first 2 books. Within this book, we're following a universe where there's this unified central governing body, and there are a bunch of other organizations that are not part of that and maybe aren't big fans, and they're at war with each other constantly. But that's not really the main focus of this book. The main focus of this book, just to be simple, is we're following this main character, Rawl Endymion, and he is kind of tasked at the start of this book with this girl is coming through. He finds out this girl is coming to the present through time travel methods, and he has to first rescue her because other people are after her, and second, go on this grand prophesized journey with her across a bunch of different worlds through this magical river. And that's the meat of the story. We're following that journey, and overall I did enjoy this book. I gave it a 3 stars, maybe 3.5 stars. I don't think there's a lot necessarily wrong with it. I will say the pacing at certain points is a little strange because we're going through all these different planets and worlds, and some are more interesting than others, and some it's a pretty long book, and so at certain points I was like, what's the point of spending this long in this area? I felt like it was a little unnecessary, and also I don't think really the characterization was anything super special. Overall, I just think this doesn't really live up even remotely to how good the first 2 books were. I think Hyperion, the first book, was absolutely incredible. In that book, we are following these 7 different stories basically that we get wrapped up in this one novel, as these 7 characters are on this expedition. And the first 2 books, we kind of follow that and the fallout of that, and I think that's probably some of the best sci-fi I've ever read. This was just okay. It was enjoyable enough, but nothing special, and I don't even know if I'll read the last book. We'll have to see. I feel kind of obliged to do so at this point, because honestly I did find the setup of the ending kind of interesting, and there are some mysteries that are unsolved from these first 2 books that I would maybe like to find out more about. But overall, I didn't really expect to like this as much as the first 2, so I wasn't really let down, but it's basically exactly what I expected. Good, okay, but nothing amazing. The second book I read this month is very, very hard to talk about, but it's a reread of Sula by Toni Morrison. This is a very short book that is absolutely densely packed with basically any topic under the sun that you can think of that deals with complex human emotions. This is about love, it's about betrayal, it's about race, it's about gender, it's about friendships, and it's about how communities ostracize certain people. It's a book that I really feel like has a lot of ambiguity in it, and it's not an easy book to read. There's a lot of stuff that goes on in here that is it's not random, but it feels very hard to decipher, and doesn't have it doesn't give clear answers to any of the thematic questions it kind of poses, and I think that's what makes it so special, is it really requires you to think and form your own opinion on some of the stuff that happens. At least that was my experience, and having read it a second time, I enjoyed it very much so. Once again, I think I got even more out of it, and made me think even more, and I'm really, really glad I reread this, and I think this is probably my favorite Toni Morrison book at this point, I can say confidently, and I would really recommend this, even as a starting point. I think it's so good because it's also short, but this is absolutely incredible. Also, the writing is incredible. I think she's probably one of the best writers I've ever read from, because literally every line, you could quote any line from this book, I feel like, and it'd be some masterpiece. It's also engaging, and you kind of want to keep reading it too. So I just think this book does everything, absolutely everything well, and I'd say it's probably one of my favorite books ever. Having reread it at this point, I can say that with some confidence. I don't know, but I would highly, highly recommend this, and I'm so glad I had time and energy and motivation to reread this. So this next one, I was debating even including, but I decided I would because I actually did enjoy this a lot, and that's The Lady of the Dawn by Alejandro Casona. And this is, I actually read this in Spanish. This is a play originally from Spanish that's been translated into English, so you can still read it. But this is a very, very, very weird play, and I didn't really know anything going into it. I read it for school, and I didn't really know what to expect at all, but I ended up really, really enjoying it. I didn't rate it because I don't really know how I would even go about that. This is also pretty short. It's a play, so I don't want to give too much away, but the main setup is that we're following this family who has been left in a kind of terrible position when one of the daughters, the eldest daughter, the most beloved and perfect daughter, drowned in a river by the town 4 years ago, and we're coming up on the anniversary of her death, and the house is very confined. The mother is still grieving and can't move on, and then one night a stranger, a pilgrim, walks to the door and asks to come in, and that's kind of the setup for everything that transpires after that. This is a book that deals a lot with death. That's the main theme of this book, and it handles it really interestingly. There are certain things in this book, especially near the end, certain discussions of suicide that I think are outdated and not really good, don't really send good messages at all, but I think overall just the characterization and the way the author plays with death is so surreal, and also just so different from anything. I really like the way that death is talked about in this book, and it talks a lot about fears around death, but also how death is a part of all of our lives, whether we like it or not. And I just think that's a very powerful message, despite the few things here and there that I thought were probably outdated or I just didn't agree with. So I really, really enjoyed this. Next, I read Transcendent Kingdom by Yagyasi. I don't know if I pronounced that right. I hope I did. I knew nothing about this going in. I've heard of the author. I've heard of her other book, Homegoing, and I decided to pick this up because I read the synopsis at some point, probably when this first came out, and I had marked it as something I wanted to read, but I really had no expectations going in, and I ended up enjoying it quite a bit. We're following this woman who is a 6-year PhD student who's studying neuroscience and is working on some experiments with addiction and a reward-seeking behavior. And the way it kind of relates to her life is kind of the big metaphor of the book is her brother, when she was younger, passed away from an overdose. And so in this book, we're getting these kind of two timelines, but also two different views of her life. We're getting her life in the lab while she's working. We're getting her life with her family and her mother. And then in the past, we get the life she had with her family, her mother, her brother, and her father. And we just watched the kind of whole story unfold. We watch her struggle with her own identity, with her relationship with her family. We watch her mother struggle with her own identity and depression. And I just think the character work in this was very, very, very good. Something I was concerned with going in was that like the metaphor of her working on this experiment while her brother had died of this, and like that being like maybe too on the nose. But I ended up, that was not a problem for me, and I still enjoyed it. It's a sad book. There's not really, I wouldn't say it's really uplifting, obviously. I think there's a line between like books that deal with topics like this that are sad and books that are sad just for the purpose of being sad, and this really did not cross it at all, which I was a little concerned about going in, but I was just very, very happy with how it talked about the topic and how the actual story was written. The writing was very good, characters were very good, and also this is very readable. And I got through this, I like read like straight through this, not in a day. I read it like in like 2 or 3 sessions, but they were like 2 or 3 like long sessions of reading. So I did really enjoy this. I gave it like 4 stars. Lastly, I have a classic, and that's Hard Times by Charles Dickens. This is a very, very, very weird book. We're following there's a big cast of characters, but mainly we're following this family called the Gradgrinds. The father is subscribed to this ideology of fact over fancy, and he instills in his children this idea that desires of the heart or passions and stuff like that need to be eradicated. The only thing that matters is statistics, facts, stuff like that. And we also follow this man named Mr. Bounderby, who is a factory owner in this city called Coketown, which is like literally the worst manifestation of industrial capitalism possible, and just really shows exploitation of the workers, how badly it pollutes the environment, etc. And then we also are following this girl named Sissy, who comes from this kind of outside perspective of a circus troupe that doesn't really subscribe to this ideology. And we have some other characters that come in later on, but at its core, this book is talking about this conflict between these two ideologies. Also very much focuses on class, focuses on Charles Dickens' kind of weird beliefs around class. He kind of has a lot of very left-leaning ideas in concept, but at the same time, in his writing, he doesn't really follow through with some of the actual theory of that, which I found interesting to read. And it was just a weird experience because like a big example for me in this is he spends so much time talking about the oppression of the workers and how awful it is, but he's scared of organized labor, and you really see that in this book. You see there's a lot of scenes where he kind of mocks labor organization and stuff like that. So it's just a kind of strange thing that I thought was very interesting to read in this book. But overall, I give this like 3.5 stars. I enjoyed it. It was a little on the nose, I feel like. There wasn't like any subtlety in here, which is fine. It got its message across for sure, and I enjoyed reading it, but it just wasn't my favorite thing ever. And there were parts of it where I felt like it went a little overboard with I really felt like I was being manipulated into feeling things instead of just feeling things because they were actually moving at some points. But I still think this is worthwhile if it's a topic that's interesting to you, and I think that there are some very powerful scenes and a very powerful message in this. So I would still recommend it just under the right circumstances, but also it's not too long, so that's also definitely a positive. Okay, those are all the books that I read this month. I'll just mention briefly, I started The Three-Body Problem. I'm only like 50 pages into it, and I'm enjoying it so far. I'm not there yet. I think this is like a first contact with aliens story. Once again, I have stuff like this like on my radar for years and then never actually get to them until I forget what they're about, so who knows. But so far we're following like this, like the Cultural Revolution. It's based in history as well, so we're following the time of the Cultural Revolution in China, and obviously fictionalized account. But we have this main character who's lived in a family of academics, and so she's directly impacted by this and this move into a new future. and I'm really just at the beginning of that, so I'm excited to see where it goes, but I'm enjoying it so far, and I will be talking about it next month. So that's gonna do it for this video. I hope you enjoyed watching and hearing about the books I read this month. I'd be very interested to hear about some of the books you read this month if you want to talk about that as well. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please feel free to leave a like, comment, or subscribe if you want, and I will see you in the next video.